Today's video, after having a look at the DC Multiverse Collect and Connect Clayface, I thought we would have some fun and go back and have a look at the Mattel DC Superheroes Clayface figure. Before we do anything, let's figure out how tall the DC Superheroes Clayface is. The figure is about 7.5 inches high, and while we're there, he's approximately 5.5 inches wide. I know what you're going to say. You've already had a look at this guy twice already, the original time, and a throwback. Why are you having a look at this guy again? Well, you know, again, I'm not to justify it, but we just finished having a look at the DC Multiverse Clayface figure, so I thought, why not? Let's actually have a look at one of my all-time favorite figures, a figure that falls within my top 5 favorite figures of all time. Let's go back and have a look at the DC Superheroes Clayface. Plus, we're also in a different backdrop and a little bit of a clearer canvas, so hopefully we can do the figure some justice that perhaps wasn't given to the figure before. I absolutely love this figure. There's a few figures that I would buy multiples of if it meant that if something happened to the original figure, I would have a go-to. I'd have a backup, so to speak. And Clayface is probably that #1 figure. This figure has only been released twice, one time in the original DC superhero line, and then he was also packaged with Batman. Now, unfortunately, anyone who's collected this figure knows right off the bat, one of the big problems with this particular figure is good and bad. The pro is the fact that they went the route of giving him a rubberized frame, or at the very least, rubbery arms, in which he's got a wire frame inside. The unfortunate trade-off to that is anybody that has collected figures like this that have rubber pieces to them, that the rubber eventually starts to degrade, starts to crumble, it starts to flake. And while I'm not necessarily there yet, it does look as if the coloring on the actual arms looks like it's starting to get a little lighter. And then the next step after that, this will start to kind of flake a little bit, and you might start seeing degrading areas of the rubber material here. Like I said, though, he was released 2 times before, one in the original release, which I happen to have 2 of. I think I might have one still in the card, and then, of course, the loose one here. And then he was also packaged along with the DC Superheroes Batman, which just had some additional brown paint added to him to give him the look that he's been fighting Clayface. Now, did you know, which really is irrelevant now, the Clayface that was originally going to be slated to be packaged with Batman was initially going to be scrapping the rubber arms altogether and instead was going to give him plastic arms. Mattel just ultimately decided, well, we've already got the figures in hand, why are we going to retool new arms? So they kept the exact same figure that was going to be packaged with Batman. It would have been really awesome as if they gave him 2 distinct figure releases. Same this, basically from head to toe would have been the same here, but with different arms, it would have been nice then to have 2 different figures, 2 slight variations to one another. So, where do we start with this glorious specimen? Well, let's start with the head. I would be lying to tell you that I don't obviously look at this figure, and the first thing I don't think of is the Batman animated series Clayface, which I'm certain that Mattel had some idea in mind when they designed this character. Between the short legs, the very broad torso, and especially the head, to me that looks like Batman animated series Clayface. Absolutely adore the head sculpt. What I do like so much about it is that you've got like opened areas, like where you could look right in there and you could almost see his soul. Okay, maybe you may not be able to see his soul, but you'd be able to at least see the internal areas of his mouth, of course covered over with this giant jaw mouth, and then these little kind of kernels of corn teeth peeking their way out from his lips, if you want to call those lips. Very bright eyes, which are also outlined in black, make them pierce even further. Now, one of the problems I had with the Multiverse Clayface, as good as that figure may be, is he just had one consistent paint scheme across the entire board. From head to toe, it was 2 colors, really. It was the darker colors of the brown plastic, mixed with the washing of a lighter color over top of that. I don't think that this figure is any bit more advanced when it comes to paint application, but at the very least, there's different variations. There's slight different colorings here. And I'm glad that they go one color, and they go actually very little in the way of a darker color over top of it. So they go with this almost just like a milk chocolate sort of brown. And it's layered over top of layers. You've got the rubber top collar piece. This section right here is rubber as well. And then you've got a secondary layer where the torso joins itself to the crunch. And then you got, another color there. It's slightly different shades, but they're close enough together that you get the feel that it's different kinds of clay all kind of mixed together to form Clayface here. And of course, I wouldn't feel like I was doing a true service to the Clayface figure. In fact, even in this video, to be comparing it to the Multiverse Clayface and not ultimately show the Multiverse Clayface. So here we go. Here he is next to the DC Multiverse Clayface. Obviously, big differences between the size. The Superheroes Clayface is smaller, but he's definitely got a lot bigger girth to him, the Multiverse Clayface. But I will say this. I like the coloring on this one much more. What I was talking about here is, as we've looked at in the figure review of him, if you haven't watched the Multiverse figure reviews, go check them out. Not yet. Watch this one first, then go check them out later. But what I mentioned in that figure review was he has darker brown plastic here, and they simply have just they've kind of just washed. So like anything sticking out on the figure texture-wise gets caught with this lighter brown. It's almost not that much off of brown than what we get here, but if only he had actually had a more consistent coloring. Instead, he looks more like the Rancor than I think he does look like Clayface. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I love this Clayface. But I love the coloring, and I think the execution still a little bit more on the original Superheroes Clayface here. Brother, size comparisons, it's not Batman. I know it's not Batman. But there he is next to a regular DC Universe figure. This would be one of my other all-time favorites, Aquaman. You can see that Clayface much bigger, much broader than a regular DC Universe or DC Superheroes figure. So going back to these rubber limbs, like I said, these are completely soft rubber. And then you have a wireframe that runs through it. So it will allow the figure to do things such as bending arms, bringing arms outward. You could extend the arms as well. But the whole time you're doing this, two thoughts probably will be popping their way into your noodle. One of which, dang, this is a nice looking figure. But secondary to that, or maybe even primary to that, you may be thinking to yourself, I don't know if I feel comfortable bending the frame as much as I am. Eventually, that wire frame may rip and puncture its way through the rubber. So not only do you have to contend with the idea that the rubber may become brittle eventually, and you can see just a little bit there happening. It may become brittle, but down the road, that wire frame may eventually puncture through the rubber material. So a lot of times I may not go to the extreme of bending this guy, bending the arms outward, that is. A lot of times I'll just keep them draped to the side, or at the very least I could bend the elbow, and I don't think it's going to be doing too much damage to the figure itself. The figure really has very little ability to hold much. As you can see, his hands are just a rubbery plastic. I suppose you could drape accessories in there, but come on, it's Clayface. He's not going to necessarily be holding rifles and axes and stuff like that. He could really make any of one of those, which goes back to a little bit of using plastic limbs. They could have also had the option to pop out hands and replace them with maces, axes, something that he could use to kill Batman with. So much to enjoy about this particular figure. I had this guy packed away in storage for the very longest of times. I kind of knew where he was, but I didn't venture into delving into the catacombs of my castle to find this guy packed away in storage. And then ultimately, I did the review of the Multiverse Clayface, and I thought to myself, man, I really miss that other superhero's Clayface. So I went digging, I went adventuring, and sure enough, I was able to find this guy. The other one that's sealed, I'm going to have to see if I can find somewhere else, and eventually maybe I'll put that one on the wall, because I love this figure so much. You know, looking at him too, he seems so far ahead of his time. If this was the kind of figure that was being released with the likes of a very Staction pre-posed Bane, how did this guy end up getting made? This guy should have been a Collect and Connect figure from the Multiverse line. This figure should have been released 5, maybe 10 years after the universe, the superhero line turned into the universe line. Like, this guy really far surpasses the stuff that we were getting from the superheroes line. It's an incredible feat. A feat of clay. I had to say it. Okay, so let's have a look at his posability. His mouth doesn't have any. I mean, I'm not heartbroken about that. His head does rotate left and right, so you can do a little bit here. Also hinges up and down. He has the upper torso crunch. He has a waist swivel, which I don't think I've ever really turned on this figure. I mean, he has, there we go. You know what? I don't think I've ever twisted the waist on this guy. But he's got the cut right there, and as you can see, he can twist at the waist. I'm kind of avoiding the arms right now just because, well, we already know what to expect with those. He has a universal joint on the legs, so the legs hinge outward. He's got a bend at the knee, which also allows the lower legs to rotate. And he's got a rotation on the foot. No ankle pivot. I guess you could slightly angle the feet if you wanted to. But the figure stands perfectly fine. I mean, I've never had any issues getting this guy to stand at all. As we already looked at the arms don't really technically have a joint that hinges out. In fact, any bit of bending, you can almost see there's a little bit of the rubber that's starting to kind of degrade a bit there. But anything that you could think you could do with a wireframe, you can pretty much do here with Clayface. The trade-off, though, is the more you handle it, the more you're essentially drying out the rubber. So you may want to keep it to a very bare minimum. Once again, one of my all-time favorite figures. I would kind of count it down. I mean, there's the top 10, there's the top 5, and then there's the top 3. Clayface would make top 10, Clayface would make top 5, Clayface would make my top 3 favorite figures of all time. It's still incredible to think that this figure came out during the DC Superheroes line. We're not talking about the Multiverse line. Even one back from that, we're not talking about the Universe line. We're talking the original Mattel DC Superheroes line. The same line that had the very Staction, very pre-posed Bane, also is the same line that gave us this guy. This guy was ahead of its time, and still to this day, I think this figure holds up just as well, if not better, than some of the outings that we're still getting from Mattel. It's absolutely baffling to think that this guy was even created, and I'm so glad not only have I picked up one, but I've also got a secondary one somewhere in the catacombs, still on card, which I'll try to keep on card till the end of time. Or at least my end of time. That's so sad. Today, though, we were having a look and going back and revisiting the Mattel Superheroes Clayface, which, by the way, if you guys are interested in picking this guy up for yourself and finding him on aftermarket, he's not a very expensive figure. In fact, you may be able to find him packaged with Batman for probably about $30 to $40, which isn't really that bad at all. If you really compare it to some of the DC Universe classic figures like Gentleman Ghost, you'd think what Clayface can get you, about $30 for a figure. That's not bad at all for a figure this old. As a side note, I would probably recommend, though, if you are considering to get this guy for yourself, maybe get 2 of them. Do the same thing that I've done. Get one so that you can take it out of packaging and enjoy it the same way that I am, and keep one sealed away, because long-term use, you can probably see this one arm coming up here, it's getting a little on the dry side. Nothing's punctured, nothing's degraded to the point where it looks visibly off, but you can tell that the rubber is starting to see a bit of its age, which is a bit of a shame that they never ended up entertaining the idea of releasing this guy with the plastic arms like they originally intended to do so. I would have loved to have seen this guy exactly the way we're looking at him right now, but with plastic arms. And I think that figure would have not trumped this figure, because I like the gimmick of the rubber arms, but at the very least, you would have had a figure that I think would have lasted just a little bit longer. This one has lasted, knock on wood, and hopefully he'll last for another 10 years or so. If you guys haven't had a chance to hit that little subscribe button down below, make sure you do so. Also, let me know down below if you got a chance to ever pick up this figure for yourself and what you think of him. More videos to be coming soon, guys, so stay tuned for those. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.